Alright, welcome to this painting tutorial of King Morlak Velmorn of the Sons of Velmorn warband. He has been primed just like all his sons in a Wraithbone spray by Citadel Paints, and the first color I am using here is, unsurprisingly, Skeleton Horde on all of his skin. And you don't have to be super careful here because there are no adjoining areas that would take any great harm from some minor spilling of the skeleton horde, so just go about and cover it properly. So this will go over all his bones and also the skulls on the base, so nothing fancy here, just finish the layer. My next color to lock in is Basilicanum Grey, and I will paint that all over his little fur thingio over his shoulders, and I will also paint it all over the stairs, excluding the skulls obviously, and the base itself. And I won't exclude the coins and stuff that's on there, just paint over with Retributor Armor later on. So rather than to go and so be super neat with trying to exclude all that, just paint all over it, and it won't really affect it much. But just watch out so that it doesn't pool too much. You don't want that ugly finish to the stonework. So a large portion of the base work already locked in here with the Basilicanum Grey and Skeleton Horde. My next color is an Love Affair instant paint, and I will paint this model in two different shades of red, the Love Affair and also the Slaughter Red speed paint, but the speed paint will go over the armor itself. The other members of this warband, his sons that is, were painted in slightly lighter colors, but I wanted a more regal feel to the boss models. I excluded the orangey robes and went for red all over here, and then went even further with the deeper Slaughter Red onto the armor, so just nudged it up slightly here. My next color to lock in is Demon Brown for all the little straps, leather straps all around the model, so on the shoulders here, but also all over the chest piece, right? And this is the equivalent of a contrast paint, but by scale 75. It's called an instant paint, and I have a video on the difference between contrasts, instant paints and speed paints, if you're interested in delving into that as well. My next color here is Iron Warriors over all the metal parts. Exclude some part that will be Retributor Armor, like the filigree on his crown and some stuff on the hilt of the weapon here as well, and the keys and some rings and bracelets and stuff. Here I'm painting with the Slaughter Red all over the armor. And here I'm painting Retributor Armor on the crown, but not the actual hat part of it, I guess. And the keys hanging from his belt, as well as the hilt of the weapon, his bracelet and his rings. As well as the coins spread all over the base. And to weather the cloak, I'm actually using Black Legion with Gore-grunta Fur in different kind of mixed proportions and slapping it all over the cloak. Well, not all over, but kind of halfway up. And then I clean my brush before it has had time to dry too much and move it in the opposite direction to kind of scale it back without getting an ugly, like, dry line. It doesn't need to look perfect, you don't have, just try to make it look as random as possible too, so don't overthink it. Just slap it on there, but don't do both sides before scaling back. Do it in portions as to avoid having it dry before you can actually work it backwards. So yeah, it's basically as that. And here's how it looked after that whole ordeal. And over the sword I'm using Basilicanum Grey in a similar fashion to the cloak. I'm kind of working it backwards, like with the dry pencil there, but leaving the lower part of the sword with all of the shade left. And over all of the other metal parts, I'm just slapping Basilicanum Grey all over, without any fancy techniques. And now onto the red. That is both the deeper red of the Slaughtered Red armor parts and the cloak. I'm using Targor Rage shade all over. Nothing fancy here at all. And over the gold, as well as over the bones and the straps, that is the Demon Brown straps, I'm using Agrax Earth Shade. Sorry if you're not having any like good focus shots of that part, but it's nothing fancy. Over the skulls here, both the skull work on the base and the model itself, I am first highlighting it with Ulthuan Grey. Before moving into a spot highlight here of Corax White. The cloak is highlighted with Wild Rider Red as a first highlight, and that's also true for the armor. I don't highlight like the blackened parts of the cloak with this though. Because it's a more desaturated looks, I'll use something different for that. My second highlight here is TROLLSLAYER Orange. And for the final highlight here on the cloak, I'm not really doing a line highlight, but rather a stipling technique, like lots of tiny little lines. Looks more like a worn kind of a deal. And as I said, on the more desaturated, blackened, sooted parts, I'm using BUGMAN'S Glow instead, as that just feels like a more natural highlight for those parts. And for the gold and metal parts, I am using Stormhost Silver as a highlight, but I'm not doing like a complete edge highlight. That would be too neat, and something more appropriate to like a Stormcast Eternal. This is a creature that's been buried underneath for a long time. This is more to like point out the imperfections rather to point out the perfections, I guess. So where it's worn, you kind of want to highlight it with this a bit to just like point out those areas to the view, right? Usually I just dry brush bases with Administratum Grey, but this was a bit more complex, this base, and I've already painted in all the gold and stuff, so I didn't want to mess that up. So I went about and did some highlights with Administratum Grey on the stonework. And I also did some stipling second highlights here with the Ulthuan Grey. This gives it almost like a cartoonish look, but I really like this worn look as well for bases and stonework. I think it looks kind of interesting. But if you don't like that, you can just do regular highlights, I guess. And then I'm suiting the cloak down even further, and this step is obviously optional, just like everything else, of course. But I'm kind of just, it's not a dry brush. I'm more like I'm not sure the right word for it. I'm kind of just stipling it on there with some different browns. I'm using like Deathclaw Brown and XV88 and something else that I'm not really sure of right now. You could go with some greys and even blood effects if you would like to make it even gorier, I guess. But yeah, I kind of like the look of the brown, but don't go overboard with it, obviously, because you don't want to mess up all your previous works. And then to give the impression of some algae here between the flagstones on the base, I'm using Waywatcher Glaze to kind of age the base even further. And with some thinned down Nihilakh Oxide, I am giving it the look of something that's been left out in the rain, basically, right? It's the really fun part of the process. I think it's pretty important to thin it down, because otherwise it can end up looking not really natural, because it will be very like closed areas of this effect, and you want it to be very, very like natural looking. You don't want like separate clumps and then you have a super clean area next to it. And then I'm using Typhus Corrosion, same there. You can kind of scale it back after applying it so that you don't have this super clear area with it and then the adjoining areas are not affected at all. That just looks off. So be sure to get a natural transition into the next areas. And then I'm using Ryza Rust as the second part of that Typhus Corrosion preparation, I guess. The sword here is kind of brittle, so you should have support with one finger from the other side when doing that. And finally, I am painting in the base with Black Legion. That's probably the most satisfying part, right? When you're done with the model and you only have the rim of the base left. If you don't like black rims, just use something like Steel Legion Drab or whatever, really. And here is the finished model from both sides. And yeah, here he is with all his sons. Gotta hand it to the design team, they did a cracking job with these models. They look fantastic in their dynamic poses and I really enjoyed painting them. So if you have enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe, hit the bell button, like and comment on the video. Stay safe, take care, until next time.